Mother the Mountain Farm is not simply a place or a project. It is a living relationship between land, lineage, and time. Run by sisters Julia and Anastasia Vanderbilt on Bundjalung country in the lush hills near Byron Bay on Australia's east coast, the farm exists at the intersection of regenerative agriculture, creative practice, and personal healing. What they are tending is as much an inner landscape as an outer one. The land itself carries a long memory. More than 60 years ago, their immigrant grandparents arrived with little more than persistence and belief, planting the first trees by hand and shaping the beginnings of what would become a thriving, subtropical ecosystem. In a region where rainforest once stood, they committed to re-establishing abundance rather than extracting from it. Their parents continued that work, expanding the plantings, learning the rhythms of the soil and rainfall, and raising a family within a landscape defined by growth, patience, and interdependence. Today, Julia and Anastasia care for the same ground alongside their mother, forming a rare three-generation continuity of stewardship that is increasingly uncommon in modern life. At the heart of Mother the Mountain Farm is a dense, living food forest, bananas bending under their own weight, tangled kiwi vines, mangoes, and avocados towering overhead, guavas, lychees, starfruit, and countless unnamed plants filling the understory. Nothing exists in isolation. Fallen leaves become mulch, shade protects moisture, insects pollinate, birds seed the forest further. The farm is not managed through domination or control, but through observation, listening, and long-term trust in natural systems. Julia and Anastasia's creative work grows directly from this intimacy with place. Through filmmaking, photography, writing, and sound, they document daily life on the farm with honesty and restraint. Early mornings, mud-streaked hands, the grief and joy of cycles that cannot be rushed. Their storytelling resists spectacle. Instead, it invites slowness, attention, and a quiet reverence for process. Viewers are not positioned as consumers of an aesthetic, but as witnesses to a way of living that asks for responsibility and humility. The farm has also become a site of personal repair. Working the land has been a means of reconciling inherited stories, navigating loss, and learning how care can be practiced without burnout or self-erasure. Healing, in this context, is not framed as a destination, but as an ongoing practice, one that mirrors the regenerative philosophy of the land itself. Just as soil rebuilds slowly through consistent care, so too do the inner lives of those tending it. Importantly, Mother the Mountain Farm is grounded in respect for Bundjalung country. The sisters acknowledge that their family story exists within a much older one, and their relationship with the land is shaped by awareness of custodianship, not ownership. This recognition informs their approach, one that values continuity, restraint, and responsibility to future generations rather than short-term gain. In a world driven by speed, extraction, and fragmentation, Mother the Mountain Farm stands as a quiet counterpoint. It is a testament to what can happen when people stay with a place long enough to be changed by it, and choose again and again to tend rather than take. At the heart of Mother, the Mountain Farm is a clear philosophical commitment to regenerative agriculture, not as a trend or a branding exercise, but as a lived practice shaped by daily decisions and long-term responsibility. The farm is treated as a complex, breathing ecosystem rather than a production unit. Every element has a role, and nothing is considered disposable or separate from the whole. The animals are not framed as commodities, but as collaborators. Ducks move through wet areas and creek edges, controlling pests and encouraging healthy water systems. Chickens scratch through leaf litter, breaking down organic matter and fertilizing the soil as they go. Goats are carefully managed to clear invasive species and dense undergrowth that would otherwise choke young plantings. Self-shedding sheep contribute manure and grazing pressure without the need for stressful shearing, aligning animal welfare with ecological function. Each species supports the land in a different way, and the sisters' work involves constant observation, adjusting timing, movement, and density to ensure balance rather than degradation. This approach reflects a deeper respect for natural intelligence. Rather than forcing outcomes, Julia and Anastasia focus on guiding processes already present in the landscape. Soil health, water retention, fungal networks, and native seed regeneration are treated as indicators of success, often more important than yield alone. Over time, this has allowed sections of the property to move closer to their original rainforest state, with native species returning alongside food-producing plants, blurring the line between agriculture and restoration. Central to the project's integrity is the sisters' explicit acknowledgement that they live and farm on the lands of the Arakwal and Minyungbal people of the Bundjalung Nation. This recognition is not relegated to a footnote. It is spoken directly, consistently, and with humility across their work. They emphasize that the regenerative and permaculture principles guiding the farm are not inventions of modern sustainability culture, but practices deeply informed by indigenous land stewardship that has protected these ecosystems for tens of thousands of years. In their films and written reflections, Julia and Anastasia openly thank the traditional custodians for caring for the rainforest since time immemorial, framing their own work as continuation rather than ownership. This ethical grounding shapes how they relate to the land, with restraint, gratitude, and an understanding that care is a responsibility inherited, not a right assumed. By weaving together regenerative farming, animal partnership, and cultural acknowledgement, Mother the Mountain Farm becomes more than a homestead. It is a practice of listening to soil, to animals, to weather, and to history. The result is a project that feels deeply human because it is honest about dependence, on land that remembers, on knowledge that predates them, and on the slow, imperfect work of learning how to belong to a place without trying to control it. Over time, Mother the Mountain has expanded far beyond the boundaries of the farm itself, evolving into a significant environmental media platform that reaches a global audience while remaining grounded in lived experience. What began as quiet documentation of daily life on the land has grown into a YouTube channel launched in 2020 that has amassed more than 200 million views and approximately 750,000 subscribers. Alongside a strong and carefully curated Instagram presence, the sisters use these platforms not to instruct or preach, but to invite viewers into a slower, more attentive way of seeing, one shaped by seasons, setbacks, and resilience rather than spectacle or perfection. Their storytelling is deeply personal. Climate disasters, including floods and extreme weather events, are not abstract concepts in their work, but lived realities that have threatened their home and the land itself. Grief, both personal and ecological, runs quietly through their narratives, as does the question of how to keep going when systems feel fragile or broken. These themes come to the foreground in their first book, Mother the Mountain, The Art of Living with Nature, published by DK, Penguin Random House. Part memoir, part reflection on regenerative living, the book reads as an intimate account of loss, survival, and the slow rebuilding of hope through relationship with place. It does not offer solutions in neat frameworks. Instead, it shares what it means to stay present and committed in uncertain times. The project's creative depth is inseparable from the sisters' individual practices. Julia's contribution is rooted in painting. She's widely described as an internationally exhibited artist whose work draws directly from her life on the land. Her paintings are lush and immersive, often collapsing the boundary between landscape and portraiture. Human figures dissolve into foliage, skin mirrors, bark, and water, and emotion is embedded in terrain. The result is an autobiographical visual language that expresses interconnection rather than separation, suggesting that identity and environment are inseparable and mutually shaping. Anastasia brings a parallel but distinct practice through regenerative fashion design. Her work challenges the ethics and environmental cost of the fashion industry by using reappropriated waste materials to create garments that feel otherworldly rather than utilitarian. These pieces are not designed to follow trends, they function as quiet protests against pollution, overproduction, and disposability. By transforming discarded materials into something delicate and intentional, her designs ask viewers to reconsider value, care, and responsibility in what we choose to wear. Together, their practices, film, writing, painting, fashion, and farming, form a single coherent philosophy. Mother the Mountain is not built on one medium or message, but on the belief that creativity and ecology are inseparable. By sharing their lives with transparency and restraint, Julia and Anastasia have created a body of work that resonates because it does not promise escape from crisis, but companionship through it, rooted in the possibility that healing, of land and self, can happen together, slowly and with care. The emotional spine of Mother the Mountain is shaped by a clear turning point in the sisters' lives. Julia and Anastasia often return to this moment in their storytelling, not as a dramatic device, but as an honest acknowledgement of why they are here now. Their childhood on the farm was defined by freedom and immersion. Tree houses built from scavenged timber, days spent in creeks, animals moving through their lives as companions rather than background. Like many children raised close to land, they eventually left. Adulthood took them into cities, travel, and creative careers elsewhere, places that offered possibility but also distance from the rhythms they had grown up with. Their return was not planned. The sudden death of their father pulled them back to the farm at a moment when their mother needed help caring for aging trees, animals, and infrastructure that had been shaped over decades. In their words, this was when responsibility became unavoidable. What had once been a childhood landscape became something they were accountable for. They described this period as the moment they consciously chose to regenerate the land for those who come after us, framing stewardship not as nostalgia, but as a forward-looking obligation. Today, their living situation reflects both practicality and intention. They split their time between their mother's home and a renovated old farm shed that now functions as a shared art studio and living space. The arrangement is modest, adaptive, and deeply tied to the work itself. Life on the land has not been gentle. They have endured severe bushfires and catastrophic floods that tore through fences, damaged paddocks, and destroyed a small cabin near the dam. Rather than romanticizing these events, they speak about them as destabilizing and frightening, yet also as teachers. The extremes of fire and water forced them to learn resilience, preparedness, and climate adaptation not in theory, but in practice. Economically, Mother the Mountain Farm is sustained through a deliberately diversified model. Income comes from YouTube advertising, Patreon support, small-scale farm products, and the sisters' respective art and design work. What distinguishes them in this space is their transparency. In videos such as Why We Live Alone in the Rainforest, they speak plainly about money, lifestyle choices, and limitations. They share that they have not visited a city in roughly 2 years, live with their mother, and earn a modest but sufficient income through their videos, enough to cover basic needs and, crucially, to reinvest directly into the land through fencing, animal feed, tree planting, and ongoing restoration. This openness is especially significant in Julia's case. She has spoken publicly about living with me, CFS, myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and the long-held belief that she would never be able to sustain conventional employment. The ability to earn an income through YouTube while working from the farm, pacing her energy, and resting when needed is described not as convenience, but as a form of accessibility that fundamentally reshaped her life. It allowed her to contribute meaningfully without sacrificing her health and to build a livelihood aligned with her body's limits rather than in constant opposition to them. Taken together, these elements give Mother the Mountain its distinctive credibility. The project is not presented as an escape from hardship, but as a way of staying with it, grief, illness, climate instability, and financial constraint included. The sisters' story resonates because it does not promise ease. Instead, it offers a grounded example of how responsibility, creativity, and care can converge into a life that is modest, resilient, and intentionally rooted in place. What gives Mother the Mountain its particular texture is the way daily life is shown without shortcuts. Much of their content is built around long, repetitive animal routines and physical work that rarely looks glamorous in the moment. Mornings begin with moving through paddocks, checking water, counting bodies, repairing what broke overnight. Days are shaped by planting trees, clearing invasive species like lantana by hand, and responding to the land's constant changes, erosion after heavy rain, saturated soils after floods, or dry stress in hotter months. Progress is incremental, often invisible, and they are careful to show that regeneration is not a single project, but a rhythm that must be returned to again and again. Alongside this labor runs a slow unfolding of creative building schemes that feel imaginative without being escapist. They openly share plans for a floating tiny house built onto an old salvaged boat, conceived as both shelter and experiment in adaptive living in a flood-prone landscape. Another ongoing vision is a large community garden in an abandoned kiwi patch, designed around no-dig permaculture principles, and potentially the future use of pigs for soil tillage, an idea they frame as an ecological partnership rather than a mechanized solution. Perhaps the most emblematic of their long-term thinking is the concept of a small, hobbit-like pump shed, intentionally designed so that a strangler fig can slowly envelop it over the next 100 to 200 years, turning an infrastructure necessity into a living monument for future generations. Animals are central characters in this unfolding story. The sisters frequently highlight individuals, Aphrodite, the queen sheep, her daughter Harmonia, and Lanky Boy, the ever-present uncle, not as mascots, but as teachers. Through them, viewers learn about self-shedding wool, flock dynamics, and animal behavior. These moments humanize the farm while grounding it in practical education. At the same time, they do not shy away from harder realities. Rebuilding fences destroyed by floods, keeping snakes away from living spaces, and managing predators, such as pythons that sometimes take ducks, are treated as part of the ecological bargain of living within a functioning ecosystem. The result is a portrayal that feels both magical and demanding, beauty always braided with responsibility. The creative process behind the channel mirrors this integrated approach. Production is divided organically within the family. Their mother, quiet, practical, and intentionally out of the spotlight, does much of the filming, offering a steady observational presence behind the camera. Julia handles the editing, bringing a painter's eye to the work. She often describes placing bird calls, ambient sound, and music like brushstrokes, building films that feel layered, tactile, and unhurried. Anastasia focuses on narration and storytelling, weaving seasonal reflections, personal insights, and contextual grounding into the visuals. She also manages much of the drone footage, openly acknowledging the learning curve that has already included a few crashes in the rainforest canopy. This collaborative structure is not incidental. It reinforces the identity of Mother the Mountain as a family-run, women-led creative farm project. Art and agriculture are not treated as separate pursuits, but as mutually sustaining practices. In a digital landscape crowded with homesteading advice and curated cottagecore aesthetics, the sisters stand apart by refusing polish without depth. Their work is slow, physically rooted, and emotionally literate, positioning Mother the Mountain as a distinctive voice, one that insists that beauty, labor, lineage, and care can exist in the same frame without dilution. Public reception of Mother the Mountain has been overwhelmingly warm, and that response is closely tied to the emotional tone the sisters cultivate. For many viewers and readers, the project functions as a counterweight to constant narratives of environmental collapse. Their films and writing are frequently described as calming, grounding, even meditative, offering beauty without denial and hope without naivete. In an era marked by climate anxiety, the sisters' emphasis on continuity, care, and slow regeneration resonates deeply, particularly with audiences searching for models of living that feel meaningful rather than extractive. Their book and channel are often praised for precisely this quality. Readers describe Mother the Mountain, the art of living with nature, as intimate rather than instructional, valuing its honesty about grief, disaster, and uncertainty alongside its commitment to repair. Viewers of the channel respond similarly, noting that the work does not promise escape from crisis but offers a way of staying present and engaged. This tone has helped position Mother the Mountain as a hopeful reference point within environmental and regenerative living media rather than a prescriptive authority. Compared with many lifestyle or homesteading creators, controversy around the project has been limited. There are no widely documented scandals, exposes, or credible allegations of fakery or misconduct attached to Mother the Mountain as of late 2025. Where criticism does surface, it tends to be tentative and discursive rather than accusatory. In comment sections and discussion forums, some viewers express curiosity or skepticism about the sisters' financial stability, the degree of unseen family support involved, or how representative their situation is for people without inherited land or multi-generational backing. These questions are usually framed as structural concerns rather than personal attacks. Another recurring critique centers on aesthetics. The channel's slow-motion visuals, carefully layered sound design, and dreamlike pacing are occasionally accused of romanticizing rural life and underplaying its physical difficulty. Some viewers worry that this style could create unrealistic expectations for those considering a move to the countryside, especially given the realities of climate volatility, financial precarity, and labor intensity. The sisters' supporters often counter that the channel explicitly shows hardship, flood damage, animal loss, exhaustion, even if it is presented with visual restraint rather than sensationalism. There are also broader philosophical debates around language and representation. A small but persistent thread of critique questions whether the lifestyle can accurately be described as off-grid, given the project's reliance on digital cameras, drones, editing software, and online platforms. Others raise more complex ethical questions about monetizing images of land, labor, and practices influenced by indigenous knowledge for predominantly Western audiences. Even here, the discussions tend to be nuanced. Critics generally acknowledge that Julia and Anastasia foreground land acknowledgments, credit indigenous stewardship, and avoid claiming ownership over the knowledge systems they reference. As a result, debate tends to focus on privilege, inheritance, and aesthetics rather than any specific ethical breach. Taken as a whole, Mother the Mountain occupies a relatively rare position in online culture, visible, influential, and largely trusted. The absence of major controversy does not mean the project is beyond critique, but it does suggest that its transparency, modesty, and refusal to oversell its lifestyle have insulated it from the sharper backlash faced by many creators in adjacent spaces. For most of its audience, Mother the Mountain is not received as a blueprint to copy, but as a story to sit with, one that invites reflection on care, continuity, and what it might mean to live responsibly within limits. Despite the questions and tensions that occasionally surface around aesthetics, privilege, or representation, the dominant narrative surrounding Mother the Mountain Farm remains one of sincerity and depth. The project is widely understood as an artistically driven attempt to live regeneratively on ancestral family land, to honor the specific rainforest ecosystem they inhabit, and to translate that lived commitment into creative forms that reach far beyond the boundaries of the farm itself. Film, painting, fashion, and writing are not treated as separate outputs, but as parallel languages through which the same values are expressed. What ultimately sets Mother the Mountain apart within the homesteading and environmental media landscape is its emotional gravity. The sisters do not frame their work as an idyllic return to nature, but as a response to loss and responsibility. The sudden death of their father, repeated encounters with climate disaster through fire and flood, and the ongoing realities of illness and limitation are not background details. They are the conditions under which the project exists. These experiences give the work a seriousness that resists easy consumption. Regeneration in their telling is inseparable from grief, uncertainty, and endurance. Disability, in particular, is woven quietly but decisively into the narrative. Julia's openness about living with me, CFS reframes productivity and success, challenging dominant assumptions about labor, pace, and value. The ability to contribute creatively and economically while working within physical limits becomes part of the project's ethical stance, reinforcing the idea that sustainable systems must also be humane systems. As a result, Mother the Mountain is rarely received as a set of instructions to emulate. Instead, it functions as an evolving story, one that follows two young women as they learn, often imperfectly, how to carry responsibility for land shaped by generations before them. Their activism is not loud or confrontational. It is expressed through care, continuity, and attention. The hope they offer is not abstract optimism, but the possibility that small, consistent acts, planting trees, repairing fences, telling stories honestly, can accumulate into something meaningful. In this sense, Mother the Mountain Farm is not just a beautiful homestead channel. It is a long-form meditation on what it means to stay with a place through grief, change, and pressure, and to choose protection over extraction. The sisters' aspiration to pass the rainforest on healthier than they found it gives the project its quiet moral center, one that continues to resonate precisely because it is grounded in vulnerability rather than certainty.